The conventional wisdom about employment is almost entirely wrong, and most people who follow it end up dependent, fragile, and stuck for the rest of their working lives. Before you assume this is another motivational speech telling you to quit your job and start a business, let me clear something up right now. That advice is mostly nonsense, peddled by people who got lucky once and now sell courses about their success. The real problem isn't employment at all. The real problem is dependency, and most people never learn to distinguish between the two. Decades of observation have shown me something that keeps repeating. Intelligent people, educated and hardworking and reliable, spend their entire careers building someone else's wealth while accumulating almost nothing of their own. They don't lack ability. What they lack is a particular kind of understanding. And today I'm going to give you exactly that. We'll cover the philosophy that separates those who achieve financial independence from those who remain perpetually dependent. The mathematics of wealth building will come up, which turn out to be surprisingly simple but almost universally ignored. Human psychology and why most people sabotage themselves. That's part of it too. And we'll discuss what you can actually do about all of this, not in some distant future, but starting now. This isn't about hating jobs, because some of the most valuable lessons you'll ever learn come from working for others. What this is about is understanding what jobs are actually for and what they're not for. When I was young, what I wanted more than anything was independence. Not Ferraris, not mansions, not status symbols. Independence. That feeling of desperate want stayed with me for years. Why would a person desperately want independence? Because the alternative is dependency. And dependency puts you in a position of profound weakness that most people never escape. When you're dependent, someone else controls your time. Bad deals, bad clients, bad bosses. You can't say no to any of them because you need the money. Your decisions get made based on short-term survival rather than long-term prosperity. And you're always one step away from crisis. Most people live their entire lives in this state, calling it having a career, calling it being responsible, calling it the way things are. What it actually is a trap. And like most traps, it's invisible to those caught in it. Here's how the mechanism works. You graduate from school and get a job that pays you enough to live on, but not much more. An apartment gets rented, a car gets bought, and you acquire the lifestyle that your income permits. Then something interesting happens, something predictable. Your expenses rise to match your income, and every raise you get, your lifestyle inflates to absorb it completely. This is not an accident, and it's not bad luck. This is predictable human psychology meeting a consumer economy designed to extract maximum spending from you at every opportunity. The part that really matters is this. While you're busy spending everything you earn, you're not building anything. You're trading time for money at a fixed rate. And you're trading all that money for stuff that depreciates, experiences that fade, and obligations that compound against you. The mathematics turn out to be brutal when you examine them. Earning money and spending money at roughly the same rate means you end the year with approximately what you started with, which is nothing. 40 years of this pattern ends your career with still nothing. Except now you're older, your earning power is declining, and you're more dependent than ever before. This is what happens to most people. Not because they're stupid, but because no one ever explained to them the difference between making money and building wealth. Making money is what you do for someone else. Building wealth is what you do for yourself. A different approach exists, and here's how it can work. There was a time when I practiced law, and I was good at it. A home got built, a family grew, and hard work filled my years. By conventional standards, success had arrived. Satisfaction hadn't. What I liked was the independence of a capitalist, figuring things out and making bets on my own judgment. Making the decisions and gambling my own money appealed to me in a way employment never could. And frankly, I usually thought I knew better than the client anyway. So why should I have to do it his way? This is not arrogance. This is self-awareness. Some people are built to follow instructions, while others are built to give them. And knowing which one you are is absolutely essential. But here's what matters most. I didn't quit my job and leap into the unknown, because that's what impulsive people do. And impulsive people usually fail. What I did instead was far more intelligent. Ownership positions got built while I was still employed. Real estate projects made up most of it. Partnerships formed with others who had skills I lacked. And capital I had saved got invested alongside theirs. Both paths ran side by side for years. And within a few years, not decades, accumulated assets reached 3 to 4 million. That's when the mathematics changed completely. That's when independence became possible. The traditional career path tells you to work for 40 years, save a little, retire, and hope you have enough. The intelligent path says, work for others while building ownership simultaneously. Reach financial escape velocity as quickly as possible. Then choose what you do with your time. These paths are not the same. They lead to completely different destinations. Now, I said this isn't about hating jobs. And here's the proof. If you're going to work for others, and most people should at least for a while, you need to understand how to do it without destroying yourself in the process. 3 rules exist for this, and meeting all 3 is nearly impossible, but you should try anyway. The first rule: don't sell anything you wouldn't buy yourself. This sounds simple, but it's not. Most people spend their careers selling products, services, or ideas they privately think are mediocre or worse. They rationalize all of it, telling themselves, it's just business, everyone does it. I need the paycheck. Here's the problem with that approach. You become what you do. 40 years selling things you don't believe in turns you into a person who doesn't believe in anything. Your self-respect erodes bit by bit. Your judgment atrophies from disuse, and you lose the ability to distinguish good from bad because you've been pretending there's no difference. The safest way to get what you want is to try to deserve what you want. It's such a simple idea, just the golden rule applied to commerce. But almost no one follows it, because following it requires short-term sacrifice for long-term gain, and humans are catastrophically bad at that trade-off. The second rule: don't work for anyone you don't respect and admire. This one matters even more than the first, and here's why. We're all subject to control by authority figures, particularly authority figures who are rewarding us. And this is basic psychology that you cannot escape. You will become more like the people you work under, because that influence is nearly inevitable. Working under someone dishonest makes you more dishonest. Working under someone mediocre makes you more mediocre. Working under someone brilliant and ethical makes you more brilliant and ethical. You don't get to choose whether you're influenced. You only get to choose who influences you. The solution I found was simple. I figured out the people I did admire, and I maneuvered cleverly without criticizing anybody until I was working entirely under people I admired. A lot of organizations will permit that kind of maneuvering if you're shrewd enough to work it out. Most people don't try. They take whatever assignment they're given and wonder why they end up becoming someone they don't like. The third rule: work only with people you enjoy. Life is too short to spend with people who make you miserable, and this seems obvious. Yet most people violate this rule constantly while telling themselves they have no choice. You have more choice than you think. Maybe not immediately, and maybe not without cost. But over time, if you're strategic, you can construct a working life surrounded by people you genuinely like. My primary partnership satisfied all 3 rules, which was incredibly fortunate. We respected each other, we enjoyed each other, and we were selling something we believed in. That combination is rare, but it's achievable if you make it a priority instead of an afterthought. Most people make money their only priority, then wonder why they're rich and miserable, or worse, poor and miserable with nothing to show for the compromise. Now the mathematics of independence deserve direct examination. The first $100,000 is brutal to accumulate, but you've got to do it anyway. I don't care what sacrifices it requires. If it means walking everywhere and not eating anything that wasn't purchased with a coupon, find a way to get your hands on $100,000. After that, you can ease off the gas a little bit and let momentum help you. Why does this number matter so much? Compounding is the answer. Most people don't understand compounding at all. They've heard of it, and they can define it on a test, but they don't feel it in their bones. If they did, they would behave completely differently with every dollar that passes through their hands. Here's the mental model that makes it real. When I saved $10, I knew I was really saving $100 or $1,000 because it just took a little wait for the math to work. That $10 invested wisely over decades becomes something much larger through forces that work while you sleep. That's not magic. That's arithmetic anyone can verify. The key insight is this: compounding needs fuel to work. Nothing to compound means nothing gained, and a little to compound means a little more. But if you can accumulate a meaningful sum, say $100,000, and let it compound uninterrupted, you've planted a money tree that will keep growing whether you pay attention to it or not. The first rule of compounding is simple: never interrupt it unnecessarily. This is where most people destroy themselves. They accumulate a little, then they spend it. They accumulate again, then they spend again. Every interruption destroys years of potential growth, and they're constantly starting over from nearly nothing. Think about it mathematically, and the pattern becomes clear. Saving and investing consistently reveals that the first 100,000 takes the longest to accumulate. The second 100,000 comes faster because more capital's working for you. Now the third 100,000 comes faster still. By the time you're building your fourth or fifth 100,000, it barely requires any additional savings because your existing capital is doing most of the work. This is how wealth actually gets built, not through income, but through assets that compound year after year. Understanding both the power of compound interest and the difficulty of getting it started is the heart and soul of understanding a lot of things about life and money. Here's the uncomfortable truth that nobody in traditional career counseling will ever tell you directly. Employment is designed to extract maximum value from you while paying you minimum compensation. This isn't evil, and it's not a conspiracy. It's just business operating according to its nature. Your employer needs to pay you less than you produce, or they make no profit from employing you at all. The difference between what you produce and what you're paid is their margin. And every employer, from the most ethical to the most exploitative, operates on this exact principle. When you work for someone else, you are, by mathematical necessity, leaving money on the table. That money goes to the owner, which is why being an owner matters so much. Now, this isn't a reason never to work for anyone, because excellent reasons to be employed exist. You learn skills, you build networks, you gain experience, you receive steady income while you figure things out about yourself and the world. But you should never confuse employment with wealth building, because they're not the same activity at all. Employment builds your human capital. Ownership builds your financial capital. Doing only the first means you'll end your career with skills nobody wants to buy and savings that won't cover a decade of retirement. This is why I keep saying the problem isn't jobs. The problem is stopping at jobs. The problem is assuming that if you work hard enough and long enough, you'll somehow end up wealthy, because you won't. The arithmetic simply doesn't work that way. You need ownership. What ownership actually means deserves careful examination. Most people hear ownership and immediately think of starting a business. That's one form, but it's not the only form. And for most people, it's not even the best form available to them. The number one idea is to view a stock as an ownership of the business and to judge the staying quality of the business in terms of its competitive advantage. When you buy shares in a good business, you become a part owner of that business. You participate in its profits, and you benefit from its growth. You're not trading time for money anymore because you're owning a piece of something that works, whether you show up or not. This relationship differs fundamentally from employment. When you're employed, you trade hours for dollars at a fixed rate with a ceiling on what you can earn. When you're an owner, you participate in the upside with no ceiling at all. The business can grow 10 times larger, and your ownership grows right alongside it. Try getting that deal from your employer and see what they say. The problem is that most people treat stocks like lottery tickets. They buy things they don't understand, hoping for quick gains, panicking when prices drop, selling at exactly the wrong time. This isn't investing in any meaningful sense. This is gambling with extra steps and worse odds. Real ownership requires a different mentality entirely. You have to think like a business owner, not a stock trader. You have to evaluate competitive advantages, management quality, and long-term prospects before committing capital. You have to be willing to sit still for years, even decades, while your ownership compounds without interference. There are huge advantages for an individual to get into a position where you make a few great investments and just sit on your ass doing nothing. You pay less to brokers. You listen to less nonsense from people with something to sell. And if it works, the governmental tax system gives you an extra 1, 2, or 3 percentage points per annum compounded that active traders never see. That last part matters more than most people realize. Every time you sell an investment and pay taxes on the gain, you're interrupting the compounding that creates real wealth. Do this frequently and you destroy most of your potential returns. Do it rarely, and the tax-deferred growth becomes enormous over time. The patient investor has structural advantages that the impatient investor cannot access, no matter how smart they are. Patience isn't just a virtue in investing. It's a mathematical edge that compounds along with your money. Some of you listening to this are thinking that you don't have any aptitude for investing, that you don't understand businesses, that you'll never be able to do what I'm describing. Maybe that's true, but probably not. Here's what observation has shown me about aptitude. Most people never discover theirs because they never seriously look for it in the first place. You have to figure out what your own aptitudes are, because if you play games where other people have the aptitudes and you don't, you're going to lose. And that's as close to certain as any prediction you can make about human affairs. You'll do better if you have passion for something in which you have aptitude. And this combination matters more than either quality alone. If Warren Buffett had gone into ballet, no one would have heard of him despite all his intelligence. That's an extreme example, but it illustrates the point perfectly. Talent misdirected is talent wasted, and most people waste theirs without ever realizing what they're giving up. The question then becomes, how do you find your aptitude? The answer isn't complicated, but it requires honesty that most people find uncomfortable. What do you find yourself doing when you're not required to do anything at all? What subjects capture your attention without effort or external pressure? What activities make time disappear while you're doing them? Where do you produce results that surprise you with their quality? These questions point toward clues about your nature. Most people ignore them because they're too busy following the conventional path, the path that leads to jobs they don't like, doing work they don't care about for people they don't respect. When you go out in the world, look for the work you would do if you didn't need the money. Don't postpone that sort of thing because you really want to think about what will make you feel good when you get older, about your life and how you spend it. This isn't idealistic nonsense meant to make you feel better. It's practical wisdom that compounds over a career. Work you love creates energy that sustains you through difficulties. Work you hate drains that energy day after day. Over a 40-year career, that difference compounds into an enormous gulf between people who end up fulfilled and people who end up bitter. People rise in life all the time who are not the smartest, sometimes not even the most diligent, but they are learning machines. They go to bed every night a little wiser than when they got up. And boy, does that help, particularly when you have a long run ahead of you. This is perhaps the biggest edge available to ordinary people, and almost no one takes advantage of it, which makes it even more valuable for those who do. Consider two people starting their careers at age 30 with similar abilities and opportunities. Person A stops learning the moment they master their job, becoming competent and staying competent, essentially remaining the same person with the same knowledge over 30 years. Person B commits to learning something new every day. Not revolutionary insights, but steady incremental improvements in understanding that accumulate over time. After 30 years, person B has compounded their knowledge the way smart investors compound their money, and the gap between them has grown enormous. Who ends up more valuable, more adaptable, more capable of recognizing opportunity when it appears? The learning machine always wins over the long term, not because they're smarter to start with, but because they're smarter at the end. The beautiful thing about learning is that it compounds just like money, but there's no tax on it. No one takes a percentage of your improved understanding, and no one charges fees on your accumulated wisdom. It's one of the few assets in life that only grows and never depletes with use. But it requires discipline that most people lack. It requires reading when you could be watching television, thinking when you could be mindlessly scrolling, admitting what you don't know, which most people find impossibly painful to their ego. The people who can't do this, the ones who stop learning the moment school ends, are guaranteeing themselves a life of gradually increasing irrelevance. Their skills become outdated within years. Their knowledge becomes stale. Their value to any organization, including the organization of their own life, slowly declines towards zero. This is not an exaggeration for dramatic effect. I've watched it happen hundreds of times to people who had every advantage except the discipline to keep learning. Now, something nobody wants to discuss deserves attention: work ethic and what it actually means. Another thing you have to have is a lot of assiduity. I like that word because to me it means sit down on your ass until you do it, whatever it is that needs doing. This sounds simple, but it's not simple at all. Most people have a remarkable ability to convince themselves they're working hard when they're actually doing nothing of consequence. They're busy all the time. They're stressed constantly. They're exhausted by Friday. But productive, not particularly when you examine what they've actually accomplished. Real work, the kind that builds wealth and creates value, requires sustained concentration on difficult problems over long periods. It requires doing the thing you're avoiding instead of finding clever ways around it. It requires sitting with discomfort rather than fleeing to distraction every time things get hard. Here's an example that stuck with me for decades. Two partners I knew had the following rule: whenever we're behind in our commitments to other people, we will both work 14 hours a day until we're caught up. No exceptions, no excuses. That firm didn't fail. Those people died rich. This is the standard almost no one holds themselves to, which is exactly why it works so well for those who do. Most people work reasonable hours, take their evenings and weekends, and wonder why they're not getting ahead. What they don't see is that they're competing against people who work 14 hours a day when necessary. That's not a fair fight, and it's not supposed to be. I'm not saying you need to work 14 hours a day forever, because that's not sustainable or desirable. What I am saying is you need to be willing to do it when required. You need to be the person who finishes what they start, who honors their commitments, who does what they said they would do, regardless of how inconvenient it becomes. If you're unreliable, it doesn't matter what your other virtues are, because you're going to crater immediately. Doing what you have faithfully engaged to do should be an automatic part of your conduct, not something you negotiate with yourself about. You want to avoid sloth and unreliability above almost everything else. This is such basic advice that it feels insulting to mention, yet most people fail here constantly. They're late. They're sloppy. They promise things they don't deliver. They wonder why nobody trusts them with important work or real responsibility. Reliability is the foundation everything else is built on. Without it, no amount of intelligence or talent matters because no one will give you the chance to use them. On elite college campuses, I've often made myself unpopular, pushing this reliability theme. Here's what I tell the students who think they're too good for basic work. McDonald's is one of our most admirable institutions. Signs of shock appear on surrounding faces every time. And then I explain what I mean. McDonald's, providing first jobs to millions of teenagers over the years, many of them troubled, has successfully taught most of them the one lesson they most need: to show up reliably for responsible work. That's the whole lesson. Show up. Do what you're supposed to do. Be where you're supposed to be when you're supposed to be there. Nothing more complicated than that. This sounds laughably simple to anyone who hasn't tried to hire people and build something. But if you've ever tried to build an organization of any kind, you know that reliable people are rare, shockingly rare, worth whatever premium you have to pay for them. Most people have elaborate excuses for why they couldn't do what they committed to do. The people who just do it every time without drama or explanation needed are worth their weight in gold. If you're young and hearing this, or if you have children, understand what entry-level jobs are actually for. They're not for making money because the money at that stage is irrelevant to your long-term trajectory. Therefore, building the habit of reliability, therefore proving to yourself and to others that you can be counted on when it matters. Once you have that foundation, everything else becomes possible. Without it, nothing is. Something that doesn't get discussed in most success literature deserves attention. Bad things will happen to you, guaranteed. No exceptions. Life will have terrible blows, horrible blows, unfair blows. It doesn't matter how careful you are or how well you plan. Some people recover from these blows and others don't. And the difference often comes down to attitude rather than circumstance. The attitude of Epictetus is the best one I found for dealing with misfortune. He thought that every miss was an opportunity to learn something valuable. Your duty was not to be submerged in self-pity, but to utilize the terrible blow in a constructive fashion that made you stronger. This is not positive thinking nonsense designed to make you feel better temporarily. This is practical psychology that actually works over time. Bad things are going to happen regardless of your attitude about them. And the only question is whether you emerge from them stronger or weaker than before. Self-pity is the most destructive of emotions because it accomplishes nothing and changes nothing. It merely ensures that you suffer twice, once from the event itself, and again from your reaction to it, which can last much longer than the original problem. The constructive response to adversity is to ask yourself specific questions. What can I learn from this that I couldn't learn any other way? How can I make sure it doesn't happen again? What opportunity might this create that wouldn't exist otherwise? These questions sound cold when things are terrible, but they're the questions that move you forward. Wallowing in how unfair it all is moves you nowhere at all. My advice for coping with the inevitable difficulties of life is simple and maybe a little surprising. Have low expectations about how easy things will be. Have a sense of humor about absurdity. Surround yourself with the love of friends and family who actually care about your well-being. Low expectations might sound pessimistic, but it's actually liberating once you try it. If you expect life to be difficult and unfair, you're not surprised when it is. You're prepared. And when good things happen, they feel like bonuses rather than entitlements you deserve but didn't get. The people who struggle most with adversity are those who expected everything to be easy. Their expectations betray them at exactly the wrong moment. A thinking tool that will serve you for the rest of your life deserves explanation here. Thank you.